Growing up in a small suburban town, my life felt like a stage where my younger brother, David, was the star performer, and I was merely a background character. David was the golden child, charming, talented, and adored by everyone. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, independent kid who preferred books over sports. It was a combination that never worked out well for me. Our parents poured all their energy into celebrating David's achievements, while I often found myself invisible, lost in the shadows of his spotlight. As the years passed, David's favoritism became painfully clear. I can still remember the countless times I'd come home from school, excited to share my day, only to be met with blank stares as David regaled our parents with tales of his accomplishments. It was as if my words vanished into thin air, a reminder that I didn't quite fit into the picture of what a successful child should be. The resentment I felt towards my brother began to fester, a silent storm brewing within me. But David's golden exterior masked a darker truth. He was also the family bully, and his relentless tormenting became a significant part of my childhood. What started as typical sibling rivalry morphed into something far more sinister. He'd hurl insults at me, taunt me about my interests, and orchestrate elaborate pranks that often left me humiliated. I remember the day he nearly set my hair on fire, giggling as I desperately tried to extinguish the flames. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, while my mother shrugged it off, claiming that boys just play rough. When I'd muster the courage to confront my parents, hoping for support, I was met with dismissals. My mother would tell me that I was being too sensitive, while my father was typically absent, buried in work that kept him away from home for long stretches. I craved understanding and protection, but what I got instead was a silent agreement with David's bullying. I felt alone in my suffering, trapped in a home that should have been a sanctuary. The turning point in our lives came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Dad walked in on David shoving me into a wall during an argument. It was the first time I saw rage in my father's eyes, a protective instinct ignited. He sat me down and talked to me for hours about how to stand up for myself. A few weeks later, he enrolled me in MMA classes, a decision that changed the course of my life. It felt surreal, like I had been given a chance to reclaim some power in my life. The lessons taught me not just how to defend myself physically but also how to stand tall against the emotional blows. MMA training became my refuge. It was a space where I could channel my anger and frustration. I learned discipline, strength, and most importantly, confidence. Each punch and kick was a release, a way to fight back against years of pent-up resentment. I started to see changes in myself. I became more assertive, standing my ground when David would try to bully me. Eventually, I left for university, eager to escape that toxic home environment. It felt like stepping into a new world. I thrived academically, made friends, and met Karen. She was everything I had ever wanted: funny, kind, and unafraid to challenge me. Our connection was instant. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and our mutual love for adventure. It felt like I had finally found someone who appreciated me for who I was, not who I was compared to David. As our relationship deepened, I discovered Karen was pregnant. The news was overwhelming, but we were committed to making our family work. I remember the mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. I was ready to step up as a husband and father, determined to create a loving home for our child, one that I had always longed for during my own childhood. But life wasn't perfect. The early days of our marriage were filled with challenges. Karen struggled with her own issues, including a tendency to stray. I tried to be understanding, always believing that we could work through our challenges together. However, our relationship became strained when she confessed to having an affair. I was blindsided. My heart sank when she revealed that David was the other man. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath me, leaving me floundering in an ocean of betrayal. The thought that my own brother would cross such a line left me reeling. I confronted Karen, demanding answers. She explained that it had started innocently enough, but somewhere along the way it had turned into something more. "I didn't want to hurt you," she pleaded, her voice shaky. I felt the weight of her words crush me. It was as if my entire world was unraveling. The betrayal was compounded when Karen revealed that our son might actually be David's. I could hardly breathe, it was too much to process. I felt like I was in a nightmare and no amount of pinching myself would wake me up. I remember that night vividly, the tension thick in the air as we sat in silence. I couldn't look at her, couldn't comprehend how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The paternity test loomed over us like a dark cloud, and when the results came back confirming my worst fears, It shattered my world completely. I left Karen feeling betrayed and heartbroken, seeking refuge in my parents, hoping they would provide some comfort. Initially, they were shocked, but their shock soon morphed into anger when they learned the extent of David's betrayal. Dad made a bold decision. He cut David off, disowning him entirely and altering his will to leave everything to me. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. On one hand, I had lost my brother, but on the other, I finally had my parents' backing. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that my brother, who had made my life hell, was now completely cut off from our family. David, suddenly cut off from our parents' financial support, started reaching out to me for help almost immediately. He sent desperate texts, pleading for assistance and a chance to make amends. "I'm your brother, please help me," one text read. I remember staring at my phone, my heart racing. I refused to respond. I wanted to remind him of the consequences of his actions, the pain he had caused me and my family. The resentment I had carried for so long flared up inside me, fueling my decision to cut ties. Things became even more complicated when my mother, ever sympathetic towards David, leaked information about the will to him. That revelation ignited family tensions once again. Dad was furious when he found out and confronted my mother, telling her that if she continued to support David, he'd walk away from their marriage. It felt surreal watching my parents' relationship unravel as they fought over a son who had betrayed us all. I felt caught in the middle, longing for my mother's support but also needing to align myself with my father, who had finally stood up against David. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional toll weighed heavily on me. I tried to focus on my work and my son, but the chaos at home kept creeping into my thoughts. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of family drama. I leaned on therapy more than ever, using it as a tool to process my feelings and navigate the tumultuous waters of betrayal and grief. My therapist guided me through the steps of healing, helping me articulate the pain and anger that had been building up for years. 5 months passed and I slowly began to rebuild my life. I spent more time with my father, our weekends filled with laughter and shared stories. The bond we were forming was something I had longed for during my childhood, and it felt good to have him in my corner. We would go fishing, watch sports, or just sit in the backyard reminiscing about simpler times. It was as if the void left by David's betrayal was slowly being filled by the genuine connection I was fostering with my dad. I even received a promotion at work, which boosted my confidence further. I had found my footing in a chaotic world, and therapy was helping me navigate the emotional fallout from my past. It was empowering to realize that I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I had taken charge of my life and it felt exhilarating. I began to envision a future free from the shadows of my childhood. Meanwhile, David's life spiraled into chaos. He had dropped out of college and was living with Karen and our son. I chose to stay distant, focusing on my healing and recovery. I felt anger towards him but also a sense of pity. David was now facing the consequences of his actions, and I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction watching him deal with the mess he had created. I kept my distance from Karen too, recognizing that engaging with her would only reopen old wounds. I remember one particular evening, sitting on my porch, sipping a cold drink as the sun dipped below the horizon. I spotted David walking by with his head hung low, a look of defeat etched across his face. For a moment I felt a pang of empathy. After all, he was still my brother, but then I recalled all the pain he had caused me over the years. I couldn't let myself feel sorry for him. I had worked too hard to reclaim my life, and I wasn't about to allow him back in to disrupt my hard-earned peace. As the months turned into a year, I learned to appreciate the freedom I had carved out for myself. I no longer felt the weight of my brother's bullying dragging me down. Instead, I was building a life filled with meaningful relationships and the hope of a brighter future for my son. I began to foster connections with friends and family who truly valued me, and that made all the difference. I often thought about how life had turned out. It was a strange twist of fate. I realized that while David had made my life hell for years, he had ultimately pushed me to fight back, to find my own strength and to reclaim my life. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but it had shaped me into the person I was becoming. A strong, resilient father who was determined to break the cycle of toxicity. In the months that followed, I embraced my role as a father. I started volunteering at local community events, wanting to give back and be a positive force in others' lives. I connected with other parents, sharing stories and experiences, It was liberating to be part of a community that valued support and understanding. I was healing and I wanted to help others do the same. As time passed, I occasionally heard whispers about David's life through mutual acquaintances. He was struggling to find stable work, and there were rumors that he and Karen were having issues. It was a bittersweet feeling. While I didn't wish him harm, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. He was facing the consequences of his choices, and that was something I couldn't ignore. Despite the bitterness that lingered, I remained focused on my own life. I had a new job opportunity on the horizon and was excited about the possibilities it presented. I envisioned a bright future for my son, filled with love, laughter, and security, everything I had craved growing up. I was determined to create a different legacy, one built on kindness and resilience. As I sat in my backyard one sunny afternoon, I watched my son play, his laughter filling the air. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the scared boy hiding in the shadows of his brother's cruelty. I was a man who had faced his demons and emerged stronger. I was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that I had the power to shape my own destiny. In conclusion, David had made my life hell for so many years, but in doing so he had unknowingly propelled me towards a brighter future. His actions had forced me to confront my fears, build resilience, and create a life filled with love and hope. While our paths had diverged, I was grateful for the lessons learned and the strength I had gained. As I continued on this journey of healing and growth, I knew one thing for certain. I was free, and I would never allow anyone to take that away from me again. The brother who made my life a nightmare now asks for my aid.